So my name is Ada Erlinson, and I am your host for today's Fields of Fork webinar. It is brought to you by North Dakota State University Extension, and this is our 11th year that we have done this series, and we're so glad that you have joined us today. We've archived all of the webinars from previous years, and that link is on our Fields of Fork webinar page. You can also download the certificate of attendance for today on that page. We've had about 50,000 live and recorded views since we began this series, and we offer a special welcome to our watch parties that are also watching across the state of North Dakota. The next slide shows the upcoming webinars. We hope that you can join us for these as well. We have a special request. This program is sponsored in part with grant funding from the USDA's Agricultural Marketing Service. I'll ask that you complete a short online survey that will be emailed right after today's webinar. And as a thank you, we'll provide prizes to the lucky winners of random drawings. So be sure to complete the survey with your address and then your city and state and zip code. After the summer season, we'll send up a follow-up survey in the fall to see how you're doing. All right, so now I'm happy to introduce today's speaker, Julie Garden Robinson. Julie is a professor and food and nutrition specialist at NDSU. She develops educational materials and does research in the areas of nutrition, food safety, and health. She has written a weekly column called Prairie Fare since 1997. And this year, 2026, she appears in a Field to Fork segment on the Prairie Yard and Garden channel on PBS. So Julie, please take it away for today's webinar.
It's kind of strange for me to be in this spot. I'm usually the introducer, but thank you, Ada. And I want to thank all of you for joining us. I was looking back at the history of Field to Fork, which started in 2016, I think. And we wouldn't have continued it without all of you participating. So I want to extend my thank you to all of you, because if no one showed up for our party, we'd probably have to stop. So thank you for being here today. I am going to be talking about food preservation, and we'll have another speaker a little later in our series. And today we'll be taking a look at drying or dehydration. And we're going to look at fruit leathers, apple chips, and even though it's not a fruit or vegetable, a lot of people are interested in preserving their own jerky, so I will also share some information about that. But first, this is our non-discrimination statement that we share at all of our gatherings. So this is where I'm heading today. We're going to talk a little bit about the history of drying, and there have been entire books written on that topic. We'll take a look at dehydrating equipment, what to look for. If you don't have any and you'd like to start, I hope I inspire some of you to do some different things and make use of all that wonderful produce that we will be growing soon, I hope. We'll talk about fruits and vegetables that rate especially well for drying. We'll walk through fruit leathers and drying meat, as I mentioned. And I'm also going to throw in a little bit of information about freeze drying. I learned about freeze drying back when I was studying food science in college. And now, if you have the money for it, you can buy your own freeze dryer and do it at home. So let's go back in time. Dried meat is the oldest type of food dehydration because our distant ancestors had to stay alive in some way, and meat is high in protein. Unfortunately, we don't even have a year for when meat dehydration began. It predates recorded history. On the other hand, dried fruit dates back to 12,000 BC in Mesopotamia. So they had fruit and meat, and we'll be talking a little bit about how that was used, maybe even together. So one of the oldest ways of preserving food is actually drying. They harness the power of the sun and the wind to naturally dry foods. And indigenous populations were especially skilled at making use of the natural resources all around us. And what was the end product? They were creating the original portable snacks, these calorie-dense food sources that made it possible for them to survive during migrations and during long winter months, especially those of us in the upper Midwest. But it's sunny today, and I have a feeling spring is on the way. So as I mentioned, indigenous peoples were especially skilled, and these were some of the examples of dried foods that they created. So bison, a very big food source for the indigenous populations of the upper Midwest, all across North Dakota, venison or deer, salmon, other types of fish, corn, berries, squash, and something called pemmican that you might be familiar with. It's also called wasna, and it has some other terms, and that includes dried meat, fat, and berries. So it was really an energy bite back in the day. And in fact, some of our colleagues have told us that one of these pucks of pemmican probably was enough calories to sustain you for an entire day. And by the way, we are working on a new program about indigenous foods. My intern has almost completed it, so that will be forthcoming, and there will be a handout on our website eventually. So now I'm going to take you back to the chat, and if you want to open it up, Ada, so everyone can see each other's answers, I'd like you to name some widely available dried foods today. What are some dry foods that we could go to the grocery store or maybe even farmer's market and pick up? Someone had dried pineapple today, jerky, apricots, raisins. Someone mentioned pemmican, strawberries. So let's see what I found when I was looking. I think you touched on practically all of these. But certainly we can go to some of the specialty areas of the grocery store and get bananas and apples and cranberries, or craisins they are called, raisins or dried grapes, prunes are called dried plums because they had a bad PR reputation, mango, apricots. In the vegetable area, if you buy any of the dried soups, you might have dried mushrooms, herbs, carrots, corn, potatoes, tomatoes. So there's just a lot of different dried foods. A lot of you mentioned jerky. I don't know if anyone mentioned powdered milk. That's actually a dried food. Eggs you can buy in dried form, even cheese. And coffee, if you remember back in the day, it was a big deal to go and get the freeze-dried coffee, the instant coffee. And these are just a smattering. Dried foods are widely available. And now even freeze-dried candies, and I think even some of those marshmallows that are found in the kids' cereals, I think those are freeze-dried as well. So they're kind of crunchy and sweet and so on. So next, let's take a little dive into dehydrating equipment. And as you've probably learned, you can buy electric dehydrators in many places, certainly online, but in many retail stores, and they're in different sizes and shapes and so on. One thing I will warn you, we bought dehydrators for some of our extension agents in the state, and we were trying to be very economical. Well, unfortunately, we were too economical, and the equipment actually started melting when they tried to use it. So that was not a good use of our funding. So we did have to replace those dehydrators. So the least expensive isn't always the best. So I have some ideas for you if you're thinking of getting one or maybe replacing the one you have. Now, I can't endorse any products, but I just went online and did a quick search. And you can see there's a wide range all the way from $50 for the least expensive, up to in the 300s. So they have different features. And one thing I will advise, I have written some publications where we give general guidelines on how long it will take to dry different fruits and vegetables. Those are just guidelines. and I think I got most of those from Colorado State. It's not going to work exactly as written for every place you are in terms of drying because humidity can affect it and how much moisture is in the food. So we always say keep your directions. So if you buy dehydration equipment, hang on to it. Keep it with your recipe books or wherever it's going to be safe, because sometimes you can find the information online on a website, and if you got it from someone else or at a garage sale or whatever, but their information is probably going to be the best in terms of how long it will take to dry your particular product, because most of the time, maybe all the time, they do experiment with their equipment to get these recommendations and put it in their technical reviews. So anyway, you can see big range of prices. The most expensive isn't necessarily the best, and the least expensive isn't necessarily the worst. So if you have access to a publication like Consumer Reports, they often will do reviews of all kinds of different equipment. So as an example, I mentioned that freeze dryers are now being used, and I had never used one of these other than in food science, but quite popular one that I've seen in a lot of retail stores has quite a price range, anywhere from almost $1,600 to almost $2,500. And I've seen them down the block from where I live. I'm not endorsing it. I don't have one. I don't know that I would buy one, unless I was wanting to be a cottage food business and sell freeze-dried marshmallows or candy or something like that. But they are available. And I do have some additional information I'll share with you in a little bit. So when we're looking at a standard food dehydrator, there are some things to consider. You can see across the top. You want to think about the heat control, the airflow, the tray edges, and the overall safety. So in terms of heat control, you want to look for that range, and usually the recommended range for your dehydrator would be anywhere from 85 to 160 degrees Fahrenheit. Most of the time, our guidelines say don't go over 140, because if you get the product too hot, we can have something called case hardening happen. And so it's hard on the outside, dry on the outside, and the inside of that substance, whatever it is, will still be pretty moist, but we can't get that good flow of that drying heat. You do want a thermostat, so you know what temperature it is, and a fan. And most of the time, they do recommend a 2-speed fan, like high and low. And that fan should direct air horizontally, so across the product. And you can guess why you'd want tray edges, because if you were to put fruit leather on something that didn't have edges, your fruit leather would now be over the edge and in your food dehydrator. So most of the time, they will say, anywhere from 1/4 to 1/2 an inch high. So that's to retain your product. You don't want to overfill the trays. When it comes to safety, look that it's a grounded plug, and it's a good idea on anything electrical to look for the Underwriters Laboratory UL label, because that will indicate that it's undergone some special safety testing. So those are some things to think about. And by the way, a handout of my presentation has been uploaded to the Field to Fork webinar page. So if you want to go back and write some notes to yourself or whatever, or even right now, you could do that. They're there for you. This is not secret information. Now let's look at which fruits are rated as excellent, good, fair, or not recommended. That doesn't mean it's not safe. It's just you're not going to get a super duper great product necessarily. So excellent. If anyone has an apple tree and you're hoping for a big crop, apples are excellent when it comes to food dehydration. So are apricots and cherries, citrus peel, grapes, peaches, pears, and pineapple. So someone earlier mentioned they had dried pineapple as a snack. So if we all lived in Hawaii, we could just pick one and dehydrate it. But we can also buy it at the store, right? As far as good ratings, we have bananas, plums, and rhubarb. Rhubarb sometimes gets a lower ranking because it is a little stringy and it's also very, very sour. So you could put it into, sauce, for example, and add sugar to make it more palatable. Plums, if you have access to plums, you can dry them. When it comes to fair, we have blueberries and strawberries. And if we have berries with a lot of seeds, those are really not recommended. I mean, you could do it. It's not going to hurt you, but you might not like the product. Citrus fruits tend to get really bitter, so that's why they're really not recommended. So this came from So Easy to Preserve at the University of Georgia, by the way. So let's talk in a little more depth about dehydrating fruits. So the cardinal rule when we're preserving food is to preserve the best and eat the rest. So if something's kind of going bad and it's not your greatest fruit that you have, use it up, eat it, make fruit crisp or whatever out of it. But when it comes to dehydrating, choose your best product. It should be fully ripe, fresh. We want to wash it well. Now, I want to clarify when I say wash, I just mean use running water. We don't want to use soap on these products. There are some produce washes that are considered safe, but are they needed? That's not the general recommendation. So, plenty of running water is fine. If you find fruit that is bruised or it has other signs of decay or if it has mold, that's not the stuff to dehydrate. We want fresh, good quality fruit. And then we can pre-treat if needed. Some of our fruits, especially bananas and apples, they tend to darken. So we have to treat them with something that is an antioxidant. When fruits darken, that's just telling us that they are oxidizing. So the oxygen is acting on them, and in particular with the enzymes. It's not necessarily harmful to you. It isn't harmful to you, but it doesn't look that great. So one of the best things to do is to figure out a solution. You can use ascorbic acid, which is basically vitamin C, or citric acid. You can guess citric acid comes from citrus fruits, lemon juice, and in the world of food preservation, it's really fine, preferred to use bottled lemon juice, bottled lime juice. And then we can also use sodium metabisulfite, but some people react to sulfites. So probably these top three, ascorbic acid, citric, and lemon juice would be your best bet, and that will defray the chances for that fruit to darken. So if you dip your apple slices in this, you could also, if you want, put a little cinnamon and sugar on top if you like a sweeter product, and go ahead and dehydrate it and watch it so that it doesn't over dry. So we have some terms when it comes to dehydrating fruit. Cracking the tough skinned fruits. So that means a quick dip in boiling water, and that will kind of open it up a little bit. You're not cooking it, you're just disrupting that outer shell. And that will allow you, after you drain it well, to go ahead and dehydrate it. I mentioned having a temperature range on dehydrators, and 140 seems to be the optimum temperature. And, it all makes sense. Thick slices will take longer than thinner. And it's also a good idea to flip these over every 3 or 4 hours while drying so that they're becoming equally dehydrated. So how do you know when it's done? Well, it should be almost leathery. You've all probably tasted dried apricots and raisins and so on. They're not completely hard and brittle. They're a little bit leathery, supple. They kind of bend a little. Um, cool them to room temperature and wash your hands. And then you're going to grab a handful of your fruit with your clean, dry hands and squeeze it. If your hands stay dry and the fruit springs apart when released, it's dry. So that's kind of an easy peasy way to check on your state of dehydrating. So how do we store it? Well, we have another step before it's officially dry, conditioning. And that usually lasts for anywhere from 4 to 10 days. And how do you do it? You place your dried fruit loosely in a container about 2/3 full. You're going to lightly cover, not completely cover, because if you cover it completely, say in a canning jar, you're not letting that any moisture leave and kind of equilibrate. So lightly cover, store in a warm, dry, well-ventilated area. Shake it up periodically during that 4 to 10 days, and that will keep your pieces separated. If you note in your jar or container that there's moisture forming, that means you got to put it back in the dehydrator. It wasn't fully dry enough. And once it's all dry, you can store it in a tightly sealed container in a cool, dry place. Now, if it was my family, we have an apple tree in our backyard, and they love to make apple slices. They didn't even last 4 days. They were eaten within that time, very quickly. Now let's talk about fruit leather. This is an economical way to make a snack, and it's fun. Kids can help you do all of these things, really. So one of the best ways to make fruit leather is just open up a jar of apple sauce, and you can season it. You could actually mix it with fruit of your choice, some berries perhaps, and dry it out as I'll describe here shortly. So apples, apricots, berries, cherries, peaches, pears, pineapple, and strawberries all make excellent fruit leather. Plums are pretty good as well. Then we get down to our fair category. Bananas, because of their tendency to turn dark. It's still edible, like I said, it's not a safety risk, but it might not look as beautiful. Grapes have a lot of skin, and so that can, not be as appetizing, I guess. Rhubarb, poor rhubarb. Rhubarb's always getting a bad name, but it's kind of stringy and also very sour, so you would need to add a lot of sugar or sweetener of some kind. It can be honey. And I don't have any in the not recommended. So you can try your hand at doing this, but it's kind of fun to make this, and I will show you some other information. So what are we doing when we're making fruit leather? You can buy these in the store, of course. Fruit Roll-Ups is a brand name. We can blend almost any fruit combination that you like. But if you put lemons and grapefruit in, well, kids, I guess, do like sour things these days, but they can become bitter. These citrus fruits can become kind of bitter during drying, so it might not get eaten by your family. So here's how to do it. So we start with 2 cups of ripe or slightly overripe soft fruit. Rinse it, remove any blemishes, any seeds, pits, cores, cut it into chunks. And here's a step that not everybody realizes, and this is for safety. Fruit should be heated to 160 degrees. So basically you're pasteurizing that fruit because fruit is grown in nature and lots of things could have landed on it that can't be washed. off. So you're going to heat it up and just get it to that temperature. Use your thermometer. You can do it in your microwave oven and 6 to 8 minutes on high for every couple cups of fruit and stir every 2 minutes. So it doesn't take you very long to do this. It can be done in a microwave oven. And that isn't going to harm its nutritional value. You might lose some of the vitamin C, but it's still good. So you have your cooked fruit now. You're going to put it in a blender or food processor. I could add some lemon juice, about 2 tablespoons per 2 cups. If you're using canned fruit, you do not have to add the lemon juice because that's already been heated and probably already has ascorbic acid or something to keep it looking good in the can. And if you want, you can add some honey. So, tablespoon or two of honey per 2 cups. And if you like the flavor of spices like cinnamon, which naturally enhances sweetness, or nutmeg, if you like that flavor, that can be added as well. That will give some specks, some brown specks. That's not going to hurt you. Just adds a lot of flavor and maybe a little antioxidants. So here are the next steps. We are going to spray the tray with vegetable spray. And we already talked about having an edge, so you're not going to have your fruit leather slip into the bottom of your dehydrator. And another thing I want to add is that it should be evenly spread. So if you're working with children, they might not have had as much experience in spreading things out to be evenly, but you want it 1/8 to 1/4 inch thick. And that's for consistency. So now you're going to set your temperature control at 140 to 145 and allow it to dry. That's quite a long 4 to 10 hours is quite a big difference, but you're going to keep an eye on it. If you over dry it, it could actually almost burn, so you want to keep an eye on it. So it should be translucent, still a little tacky. When I've made fruit leather at home, I usually put a layer of plastic wrap and then I spray the plastic wrap, and then I can easily make fruit roll-ups out of it if I want to make my own. So you're going to touch it briefly and then you can peel it from your plastic. Shouldn't have indentations when touched, so you shouldn't see a mark of where your finger was. When it peels, it's basically ready. If it starts chipping or cracking, you've probably left it in there too long. So after trying it, one time with the type of dehydrator you have and whatever your secret formula is for your fruit leather, you'll be able to kind of follow that. So it's a little bit of an experiment, but it's a fun one. So to store it, we're going to loosen it from the plastic wrap. And here's the fun part. You can loosely roll it in your plastic wrap or waxed paper all in one big long piece. And you can store it in a piece or you can cut it into little strips. So you could cut it in 1-inch chunks, and then whoever gets to enjoy it can just sort of unroll it and have a longer piece of the rolled up fruit leather. So what next? Place these rolls or strips of leather in a glass container, a paper bag, or a plastic bag. So any of those are fine. Keep it loosely closed until it's completely dried. If you seal it too early, it may become sticky, or it could even become moldy. And I've judged a lot of fairs, and and it's kind of sad when the little kids come up to you and they have moldy jerky or moldy fruit leather. So often that indicates to me it's been sealed up tightly before it was completely dry. So let it condition as we talked about earlier. So how do you maintain the quality? Well, just like a lot of our canned goods and so on, anything preserved, keep it in a cool, dry, dark place. because if our fruits are exposed to a lot of light, they can actually darken. So we're going to keep it in a dark place, in a cupboard, for example. And if we, do this all correctly, fruit leather will retain its quality for up to a year because you can actually freeze it. So you can dry it, make your fruit leather, and put it in a freezer bag and put it in the freezer and pull out what you need a little bit at a time. You can also store it for months in the refrigerator or 1 or 2 months at room temperature. But keep an eye on it just in case it wasn't fully dried. It can become moldy. Mold has the ability to grow on lots of things, as you probably gathered, even things that are high in sugar or presumably dry. So if you are not going to eat all the fruit leather you made, maybe it's a good idea. Pop it into a freezer bag and put it in your freezer. But as with anything in food preservation, you do want to label it. Label it with the date you made it and make sure that you're not losing track of it in your freezer. So put it in a spot where you're going to see it. So you're not going to, oh, I made this 2 years ago in my. So go ahead and label it. So I mentioned that I'd tell you a little bit about freeze drying, and keep in mind, I do not have a freeze dryer. It's kind of interesting to me though. And one thing that's made freeze drying become more and more popular is probably the interest in, camping and those sorts of things. Freeze dried foods last a long time. They're very lightweight because almost all the water is taken out. And it does change their texture of the foods, but it does retain the color and shape better than dehydrating. So there's some advantages. Now, some manufacturers claim that you can dehydrate ice cream, milk, eggs, and other protein foods. I would take that recommendation with a little bit of caution because there is research going on right now to come up with more consumer-focused recommendations for freeze drying. Anything high in protein, like milk and eggs and meat and so on, is much more likely to degrade over time or could spoil even when it's dry or if it's not fully dried. So, at best, if you have a freeze dryer, be sure that when you're done using your freeze dryer, you are carefully cleaning it. Because let's say you decided to dry some milk and then you decided to dry some Skittles or some candy of some sort. Well, you could transfer any of that, residual protein, maybe some germs, from one food to another. So a very good cleaning process is needed. And of course, you want to follow the manufacturer's cleaning recommendations. So what happens during freeze drying? So if we were making freeze-dried coffee or whatever it happens to be, the machine freezes the food to about as cold as it can possibly get in North Dakota, minus 30. Somewhere between minus 30 and minus 50 degrees Fahrenheit. So it's solidly frozen. Then along comes your vacuum pump that pulls the air out and the trays are heated. So you're getting a chemical and physical process of sublimation. So you're transferring your ice to a vapor. And basically, you're taking out 98% of the water in the food. So it becomes extremely low in water. And bacteria need water to grow. So this takes it down to a level where most bacteria would not have a chance. But once you rehydrate the foods, so let's say you're going to take your freeze-dried milk or whatever it happens to be and you add water to it, the bacteria haven't necessarily been killed during the drying process, so they can come back to life. So again, you want to be cautious and think about all these factors that bacteria need to grow. And one of them is water, another is protein. So these are not small pieces of equipment. The vacuum pump itself usually weighs about 35 pounds. And I'm not a mechanic. I wouldn't know how to change the oil on a vacuum pump. Maybe some of you do that. Some require oil changes, and others do not. And many of these freeze dryers are pretty hefty. They weigh upwards of 100 pounds. So you would need a very sturdy table to put it on. And as I was listening to someone describe freeze drying in the last couple of weeks, they were talking about they're kind of noisy too. So this person had it, I think, in his kitchen or dining room, and he said the pump made a lot of noise and it also beeped like periodically all night. So it was like a newborn baby in your kitchen. So keep all these things in mind, but they're pretty neat that there's now a household version instead of simply a chemistry version of freeze dryers. So to prepare the food for freeze drying, remember that active enzymes, remember I talked about those needing antioxidants, active enzymes can lead to color changes. And then another piece to remember is that food should be equal in size and have a similar drying time. So you can't put a big chunk of something in with a tiny piece. And it's also really important to keep the spacing the same, evenly spaced on these trays. And I just want to credit Penn State University is doing some work right now on freeze drying, so you can, you know, search online for Penn State and freeze drying and you'll find a lot more information. But I just wanted to give you a taste of freeze drying, and if I could throw you all a freeze dried marshmallow, I think you'd enjoy it. So there are some applications, and I know we get some people who are interested in their own food business. So I have seen freeze-dried snacks show up, anything from candy corn to banana chips, fruit roll-ups, fruit chips, and that should say strawberry shortcake, apples, ice cream, marshmallows, cotton candy. So all of these are potential applications of freeze drying. So now we're going to delve into a little bit of meat. So we've talked about your fruit leathers and your fruit. We have a whole handout all about vegetables, but it's basically the same principles as fruit. And Ada has kindly added some of these pieces to our website where you go to look at webinars. So let's talk about jerky, which is basically dried meat. And here are some tips. If you decide that you want to make some meat jerky, best thing to do is start by pre-freezing the meat. And that makes it easier to slice, but you can't easily slice something that's completely frozen. So you do want to partially thaw it in the refrigerator, not on your counter, and to long strips, no more than a 1/4 inch thick. And you also want to take off as much visible fat as possible, because what can happen during the drying process is that a rancid taste can develop. So get the fat off of the outsides, and you can see some pieces on the board. And if you want chewy jerky, slice along the grain. For tender jerky, you can mimic your teeth's action, cut the meat at right angles to the long muscles. So you're slicing across the grain. That will make it more tender. And again, don't forget, I don't want anyone to thaw food on their counter. That's just not a safe practice. Well, most likely you want to have a marinade, and you want to have the meat spend a little time in this salty marinade. That's another safety factor. It's another hurdle for bacteria not to be able to grow. So you're looking for 2 or 3 cups. You can buy the marinade already prepared, but here's an example of sort of a tasty marinade that we've used. 2 cups of soy sauce, Worcestershire sauce, 2 teaspoons of black pepper, some garlic powder, some onion powder, and some hickory smoke flavored salt. So we obtained this recipe, and when we did some jerky tests with our new dehydrator, it worked quite well. It was very tasty. So you'll bring the marinade to a full rolling boil over medium heat and add a few of the meat strips as you see in the picture, making sure they are covered by the marinade, and then you reheat it to a full boil. And why are we boiling it? Now, this is a precaution to kill disease-causing microorganisms. So you want it to get to 160. So basically you're cooking the meat before you're dehydrating it. And the meat is quite thin, so you probably want to invest in an instant read digital thermometer. Digital thermometers are different from the bimetallic stemmed thermometer in that they can read temperature at the tip of the thermometer. So it's, a lot of the ones that we buy that are fairly inexpensive, the stemmed thermometers have a dimple, and that dimple, up to that dimple, is the sensing area, whereas an instant read will read a much thinner type of meat. So ask for that for your birthday. Next, we take the pan from the range. We'll use the tongs and work quickly. You can see we put it on a little bit of a strainer. You don't want to overcook it. You're just trying to inactivate any bacteria. Place in a single non-overlapping layer on drying racks, and then you repeat these steps until the meat has all been pre-cooked. And if you're finding that I don't have enough marinade left, might have to make some more. And here's our magic temperature. Dry at 140 to 150. In a dehydrator, I do have oven with a little asterisk because most of us don't have ovens that can get down to that temperature of 140 to 150. Mine doesn't do that. Or you can also use a smoker. But again, you're a scientist. When you are preserving food, think of yourself as having a lab coat on, and you're a full-fledged scientist because nobody wants to make anyone else sick. So that's why we have all of these safety guidelines, because meat is very much in that potentially hazardous category. So we are going to dry it and then test for doneness. And just like the other items I mentioned, when it's cool, it should crack, but it shouldn't break when bent. So you're going to use your senses and make sure that it's bendable, and it shouldn't have any moisture or underdone spots. And when we made this, and these are actually our photos, and that's our dehydrator, it tasted very good. So the next step is to refrigerate the jerky overnight, put it in a plastic freezer bag, then check again for doneness. And if you find it's not fully dry, you can put it back in the dehydrator and dry it further because you did have it in the refrigerator. And that is a step to reduce the risk of bacterial growth. So you can, and this is what it looked like when it was done, and it was very, very tasty. I do have some resources. We're getting toward the end, and we've got some time for questions, but we have loaded these on our website. So there's one about drying fruits, one about making fruit leathers. I believe we might have one about drying vegetables. I'll ask Ada if she could check on that. We have our new publication, and you saw some of the pictures. It's called Jerky, a Native American inspired snack we can all enjoy today. And we also have a course. It's a free online course based on recorded modules, and it was done in conjunction with Jandeska Tribal College. And these are all narrated modules, everything from drying to foraging to canning. So we do have all of those. You're showing us by showing up to our webinars that you do like online resources. So we have created a lot of those. So you can check these, and I can come back to this so that you can grab the QR code. We also uploaded a link to our Cooking on a Budget piece. We have about 19, I think, publications in the Pinch and Penny series. So those really teach you how to use what you have on hand to make your budget stretch. And then we have make your own snack mixes. That's one of the pinch and pennies in the kitchen. So we do have a lot of resources for you to explore further. This just, I already mentioned it, but please see the free Food Preservation 101 online course and all of the Field to Fork resources. We've been working for many years developing quite a catalog on these. And with that, I am at the end of my talk, and I have about 10 minutes left for questions. Ada, any questions for me? And I'm going to go back to this in case people want to
All
snap a
right.
shot.
Yes, you do have a few questions and some great comments that came in here. One moment here. Are we going to leave the QR code up, or I could invite you to stop sharing for a little bit so we can get into our question mode,
Well,
Julie?
you can go ahead and ask questions. I'll
All
leave
right.
the QR codes up for a little bit.
Sounds great. Well, our first question is somebody wants to know if a home oven is an alternative to a dehydrator if they don't have one.
It depends. If your home oven can get to a low enough temperature, and I think I listed the temperature because we want to be at that 140 or 150 range. Most home ovens don't do that. You can check yours out if you have a thermometer that you can put in your oven. And we'd also recommend setting up a fan next to your oven. And you wouldn't want to do this if you had little kids or curious pets because they could easily become burned. But if your oven goes to a low enough temperature, it might be possible. Most ovens don't go that low.
All right. Staying with the first question here with a fruit drying, is there an expiration date for dried fruit?
Um, Usually you would want to use it up, you know, if it's on your counter, probably, a month or two. In the freezer, it's going to be safe forever until your power goes out and it's no longer frozen. But it's got a pretty decent shelf life. And if you're not going to eat it up within a, certain length of time, you can go back and refer to those kind of the storage times I provided on the handout. And, if it's moldy, unfortunately, you do have to throw it away.
All right, we did have another question, and I think this maybe is in regards to the drying fruit as well. Someone just asked, how about using vinegar?
Um, I would guess that vinegar is going to give it more of a pickle flavor. I mean, it certainly would be an option, but vinegar has that tendency to lend its flavor to pickles, which is why we like them. It would have an antioxidant effect, but probably a better idea would be to use one of the juices, lime juice or lemon juice.
Yeah, those resources are on our Field to Fork website. It looks like we do need to update the Pinch and Pennies link, but we'll get that all working so everyone will be able to access those resources. All right, so the next question is about storing dried fruit. Is it better to use plastic or glass containers?
Once it's fully dry, I'm really becoming a glass kind of person. Anything airtight is going to be okay, but I really like storing in glass because there's not any tendency for, picking up any Anyway, the new thing, and we probably will have to write something about this, is microplastics. Glass does not have that tendency to lend particles like cutting boards that are plastic. There's a little bit of concern now that you should be using something besides plastic. But that might be something for next year. But I would say glass. Glass is great.
Okay. We have another comment asking about dehydrating strawberries. They never seem to dry very well. So, do you have any suggestions for drying strawberries?
I would probably slice them pretty well, get them down to about a quarter of an inch. Strawberries are really great for freeze drying, but because they're very seedy on the outside, you do want to make sure that any of these foods are very similar in the width that you're slicing them in. So we do, I think strawberries are included on our How to Dry Fruits publication. So we do have more suggestions, but that would be my immediate suggestion is to make sure that your slices or the size of your berries, if you're trying to do the whole berry, are very similar.
Okay. Someone had a comment about drying fruit leather, and they said that their friend makes apple rhubarb leather. That sounds really good.
That does sound really good.
Yeah. Someone also wanted to know, and I believe it was about the fruit leather, if you can use your oven for fruit leather drying. You kind of
You can
answered a little
you
bit of that,
can
but
you can try. What we don't want to have happen if your oven can't get to a low enough temperature, and I briefly mentioned this phenomenon called case hardening. So basically, you're cooking the outside and you're not getting the inside dried. So again, if you want to try your oven, get out your thermometer, oven safe thermometer, and a fan, and don't let any of your kids or grandkids or dogs in the kitchen when you're doing this because it isn't recommended to have young folks around because they could burn themselves.
someone wants to know too, do dehydrators use a lot of energy?
Not as dehydrators wouldn't use as much energy as an oven, certainly. They're pretty, yeah, they're pretty economical to run. And again, if you have access to Consumer Reports, I don't have a subscription to it, but when they do their comparisons of different types of equipment, they will also talk about energy use.
We have another good question here. Someone wants to know about drying fresh fruit slices, that they've been dehydrating apple slices for a couple of years and only have recently read that the fruit needs to be pasteurized, but they haven't been doing that, and they're wondering if that's a new recommendation and if it's still safe to dry fresh fruit.
Um, well, if you look back, it's probably a better idea to heat treat it as I talked about, especially with the fruit leathers. That's a microwave treatment. Um, you could certainly do that with apple slices. You could, briefly pasteurize it even in your microwave or dip it in water, for example, hot boiling water. Um, is it a huge food safety issue? Probably not a huge one, but anything can become a hazard, I guess. So certainly wouldn't hurt to pasteurize it.
Okay, someone's been drying apples and they're wondering, I guess they were getting maybe too crispy and they want to know if they lost nutrition by doing that.
Well, with any kind of heat treatment, baking or cooking, you're going to lose some of the vitamin C, but not enough that would become a nutritional risk for you. So And if it's apples, that wouldn't be an issue with vitamin C. They don't have a tremendous amount of vitamin C in them. And if you're worried about vitamin C, there's, any number of foods that have vitamin C. So have some red peppers, that's probably the best source of vitamin C. But with any kind of heat treatment, you're going to have some loss of vitamins.
Okay, now we got a couple jerky questions. They want to know if the marinade that we mentioned will be in the handout or where it's available.
I believe it's on our jerky making handout.
And
And
that's
we
on our
we
website.
actually
Okay.
have two jerky making handouts. One is called Jerky Then and Now, and then we have our latest one that has pictures on it. So maybe we could add both to the site so they can see both. And I know there's a marinade recipe. And you also have access to a handout of all of my slides. So that's with the recordings. So you'll see the recipe right there.
Yeah, absolutely. I can add that link up on our webpage so it's a little bit easier to find right away.
Sure. And I hope that all of you can, navigate your way back to the webinar page. Ada keeps that up, and we have the recording of each of the webinars, and we also have all the handouts that go with it. So if you just click on the down arrow, I think, and it'll take you right to all of these pieces.
Well, we have another jerky question, and they want to know what's the best beef cut for making jerky.
Oh boy, that's one for my animal science friends. I think I would probably go with a fairly tender cut. Maybe it's a sirloin steak or, something like that. You don't necessarily want to use the least tender of cuts, but you are going to, depending on how you cut it, and there are different variety cuts that are available that are less expensive, and how you slice it. If you slice with the grain, it's going to be, less tender. If you slice across the grain, it's going to be more tender. So I guess purchase the type that you like and you can afford, and maybe try a small amount of it the first time and see if you like the tenderness. So we can take one more question because it's already 3 o'clock.
Okay, one more here. We have another one about fruit leather. Someone's wondering, if you place down plastic on your trays, will that inhibit air movement? And does the plastic work with the circular stackable style dehydrator?
We've certainly used it with our circular ones. We've got a couple dehydrators. It doesn't seem to affect the airflow, and some dehydrators actually come with specially designed fruit leather trays that probably allow more of the air to flow through. But we also didn't want to drip our fruit leather out. So we've had good success with fruit leather and just lining with plastic. And just make sure you have the horizontal airflow.
All right. Well, thank you, Julie. These were great questions. I know we didn't get to everybody's questions, but if people have more, I'm sure they can reach out to you too. Um, You'd be happy to
Yes.
help them answer those questions. But otherwise, we will have these resources on our website, and we'll be sending out our survey link soon in the email. So you'll all be receiving that pretty soon.
And thank you all for taking the survey because that's what I have to turn in when I write grant reports. So we appreciate that feedback, and it also helps us decide on topics for next year. So thanks, everybody.
Yes, thank you for joining us.